Elena had seen big houses before, but nothing like this. The Harrington mansion sat on a hill, like something out of a movie, surrounded by gardens that seemed to go on forever. Fountains lit up in soft blue light, pathways lined with roses, and everywhere she looked, people in clothes that probably cost more than her rent for an entire year. She was not a guest, she was there to work. Elena adjusted the strap of her white apron and picked up a tray of champagne glasses from the kitchen counter. Her feet already hurt from standing, and the night had barely begun. Around her, other servers moved quickly, their faces blank and professional. They all knew the rules. Smile, but not too much. Serve, but don't speak unless spoken to. And most importantly, stay invisible. That was the job. Be useful, but don't be seen. Elena was 26 years old, and she had been doing catering work for almost 4 years now. It was not her dream. It was not even close to her dream, but dreams don't pay bills. And bills had a way of piling up whether you were ready for them or not. She walked out of the kitchen and into the main ballroom, and for a moment, she had to stop and take it in. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high. The floor was polished marble, so shiny she could see her own reflection if she looked down. Men in tailored suits stood in small circles, laughing at jokes she couldn't hear. Women in evening gowns floated past her like they were gliding on air. No one looked at her. Not really. A few guests glanced in her direction, but their eyes moved past her like she was just another piece of furniture. She was used to it by now. That was the strange thing about this kind of work. You could be standing right next to someone, close enough to touch them, and they would act like you weren't even there. Elena made her way through the crowd, offering champagne to anyone who wanted it. Most people took a glass without even acknowledging her. A few nodded. One woman said thank you, and Elena was so surprised that she almost smiled too wide. The event tonight was a charity gala, hosted by a man named Richard Harrington. Elena didn't know much about him, except that he was wealthy. Very wealthy. The kind of wealthy where you stopped counting money and started counting properties. She had heard some of the other servers whispering about him in the kitchen. Apparently he owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Apparently his wife came from old money. Apparently this gala raised hundreds of thousands of dollars every year for some music education charity. Elena didn't know if any of that was true. She just knew she was getting paid $12 an hour to carry trays and keep her mouth shut. As she circled the room, something caught her eye. In the far corner of the ballroom, away from the crowds and the noise, there was a piano. A grand piano. It was beautiful, all black and gleaming under the soft lights. Elena felt something tighten in her chest just looking at it. She knew that piano. Not that exact one, of course. But she knew what it was. A Steinway. One of the finest pianos ever made. The kind of instrument that professional musicians dreamed about playing. The kind of instrument that cost more than most people made in a decade. Elena's fingers tingled. It was a strange sensation, one she hadn't felt in a long time. Her body remembered something her mind had tried to forget. She had played piano once, a lifetime ago. It felt like now. Her grandmother had been a piano teacher. Not a famous one. Not a wealthy one. Just a woman who lived in a small apartment and taught neighborhood kids how to play for $20 a lesson. She had an old upright piano that was always slightly out of tune, and she had loved that piano like it was a member of the family. Elena's first memory was sitting on her grandmother's lap, watching those wrinkled hands move across the keys. She must have been 3 or 4 years old. She remembered thinking it was magic. How could pressing down on those white and black keys create something so beautiful? By the time Elena was 5, she was playing simple songs. By 7, she could play Chopin. By 10, her grandmother said she had a gift, and Elena believed her, because her grandmother never lied about anything. Music became everything to Elena. When other kids were playing outside, she was practicing. When other teenagers were going to parties, she was learning new pieces. She wasn't doing it for anyone else. She was doing it because when she played, she felt like herself, like the truest version of herself, like nothing else in the world mattered except the notes flowing from her fingers. When Elena was 12, something incredible happened. A teacher at her school heard her play during a talent show and made a phone call. A few weeks later, Elena received a letter. She had been offered a full scholarship to one of the best music conservatories in the country. She still remembered the day that letter arrived. Her grandmother had cried. Not sad tears, happy tears. She kept saying over and over again that Elena was going to do something special. That she was going to play on stages all over the world. That she was going to have the life her grandmother had always dreamed of but never had. Elena believed it. For a little while, she believed all of it. But life has a way of interrupting dreams. A few months before Elena was supposed to start at the conservatory, her grandmother got sick. Really sick. The doctors used words Elena didn't fully understand, but she understood enough. Treatment was expensive. Care was expensive. Everything was expensive. Elena's mother had left when she was a baby. Her father was a name on a birth certificate and nothing more. It was just Elena and her grandmother, the way it had always been, and now her grandmother needed her. So Elena made a choice. She turned down the scholarship. She got a job, and then another job, and then another. She worked days and nights, weekends and holidays, whatever it took to pay the bills, to keep the lights on, to make sure her grandmother had what she needed. Her grandmother passed away 2 years later. Peaceful, the nurses said. She went in her sleep. Elena was 22 years old and completely alone. She sold the old upright piano a month after the funeral. She needed the money. And besides, she couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Every time she saw those keys, she saw her grandmother's hands. She heard her grandmother's voice telling her she was going to do something special. But Elena wasn't special. She was just a girl with a tray of champagne glasses and sore feet. Invisible in a room full of people who had everything. She shook off the memories and turned away from the Steinway. There was no point in thinking about any of that now. The past was the past. She had bills to pay and a shift to finish. Elena moved back into the crowd, offering drinks, dodging elbows, keeping her head down. The gala was in full swing now. A jazz band played softly from a raised platform. People laughed and clinked glasses and talked about things Elena would never understand. Vacation homes. Investment opportunities. Someone's yacht. She felt tired, not just in her body, but somewhere deeper. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. And then she heard something that made her stop. A woman's voice, high and sharp, cutting through the noise of the party. "Well, this is just wonderful," the woman said. "What are we supposed to do now?" Elena looked over. A small group had gathered near the edge of the ballroom, and at the center of it stood a man she recognized. Richard Harrington himself. He looked tense. Worried, even. The woman next to him, his wife probably, was speaking quietly to someone on her phone. Elena moved a little closer, pretending to offer drinks to a nearby group. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Not exactly. But something in the air had shifted. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, Elena had a feeling this night was about to get a lot more interesting. Elena moved closer to the small crowd that had gathered near Richard Harrington. She kept her tray raised, her eyes down, like she was just doing her job. But she was listening. She couldn't help it. Something was clearly wrong, and curiosity got the better of her. Richard was speaking into his phone, his voice tight with frustration. "What do you mean he's not coming? The performance is in 45 minutes. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. His jaw clenched. "Weather? You're telling me the entire evening is ruined because of weather?" He ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. His wife, a tall woman in a silver gown, touched his arm gently. "What did they say?" she asked. "His flight is grounded in New York," Richard said. "Some kind of storm system. He's not going to make it." Elena understood now. The pianist, the evening's main entertainment, he wasn't coming. She had heard the other servers talking about it earlier. Apparently, some famous musician was supposed to perform tonight. A big name, someone who played in concert halls all over the world. The performance was supposed to be the highlight of the gala, the moment everyone was waiting for. And now it wasn't happening. Richard ran a hand through his hair. Something Elena guessed he didn't do very often. He looked like a man who was always in control, always calm. But right now, he looked worried. "We'll figure something out," his wife said. "Maybe we can find a local musician, someone who can fill in." "In 45 minutes? Richard shook his head. "This is a disaster. Do you know how many donors are here tonight? Do you know how much money is on the line? We can't just play some recorded music and hope nobody notices." Elena should have walked away. This was not her problem. She was there to serve drinks. Nothing more. But her feet stayed planted where they were, and she kept listening. A woman standing nearby let out a little laugh. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a dress covered in sequins and diamonds hanging from her ears. Everything about her screamed money. Old money, the kind of money that had been in a family for generations. "Well," the woman said, her voice dripping with amusement, "this is quite the predicament, isn't it? Perhaps one of the servers knows how to play." She gestured vaguely toward Elena and the other catering staff nearby. Surely they must have some hidden talents. Carrying trays can't be all they're good for. A few people in the group laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Elena felt her face grow hot. The woman wasn't even looking at her. That was the worst part. She had made the joke without even bothering to see if any of the staff were listening. Because it didn't matter to her. They weren't real people. They were just background noise. Elena had heard comments like this before. Working in catering, you heard all kinds of things. Rich people sometimes forgot that the servers had ears. Or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, Elena had learned to let it go. Smile, nod, move on. Don't let them see that it bothers you. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was seeing the piano earlier. Maybe it was the memories of her grandmother that she had been trying so hard to push away. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the years of being invisible, the weight of all the dreams she had given up. Whatever it was, something inside Elena shifted. She heard herself speak before she even realized she was doing it. "I can play." The words came out quiet. Almost too quiet. But somehow, in that moment, the noise of the party seemed to fade just enough for people to hear her. The woman in sequins turned to look at her. So did Richard Harrington. So did everyone else in the little group. They all stared at Elena like she had just appeared out of thin air. "Excuse me?" the woman said, raising one eyebrow. Elena's heart was pounding. What was she doing? This was insane. She should apologize, say she was joking, and disappear back into the crowd. But she didn't. She couldn't. Something was holding her there, keeping her rooted to the spot. "I said I can play," Elena repeated, louder this time. "Piano. I can play piano." For a moment, nobody said anything. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Elena could feel her cheeks burning. She was still holding the tray of champagne glasses, still wearing her server's uniform. She probably looked ridiculous. Then Richard Harrington took a step toward her. He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "You play piano?" he asked. "Yes. What would you play?" Elena thought about it. She thought about all the pieces she had learned over the years. All the hours of practice. All the music that had once filled her grandmother's tiny apartment. One piece came to mind immediately. The piece she had been working on when everything fell apart. The piece she had never gotten to perform. "Chopin," she said. "Ballade number 1, in G minor." A murmur went through the group. Elena didn't know if that was good or bad. She just knew that saying those words out loud made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something like hope. The woman in sequins let out another laugh. But this time, it sounded nervous. "You can't be serious. That piece is incredibly difficult. Professional musicians struggle with it." Elena didn't respond. She just kept her eyes on Richard Harrington, waiting. His wife leaned in and whispered something in his ear. He nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Elena. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." Elena Vasquez. Elena. He said her name like he was testing it out, seeing how it felt. Do you understand what you're offering? There are 300 people in this room. Important people. If you get up there and you can't deliver, it's going to be embarrassing. For you and for me. Elena swallowed hard. She understood. Of course she understood. This was crazy. She hadn't touched a piano in almost 4 years. Her fingers might not remember what to do. Her mind might go blank. 100 things could go wrong. But another part of her, a part she had kept locked away for so long, was whispering something else. This is your chance. Maybe your only chance. Don't let it go. I understand, she said. But I can do this. Richard stared at her for what felt like forever. Elena could see him thinking, weighing the risks, trying to decide if she was telling the truth, or just some delusional server with dreams too big for her station. Then something shifted in his eyes. Maybe he saw something in her face. Maybe he was just desperate. Either way, he made a decision. All right, he said. You'll play. The woman in sequins looked horrified. Richard, you can't be serious. We don't even know if she... I've made my decision, Richard said, cutting her off. He looked back at Elena. You have 30 minutes. I suggest you use them wisely. Elena nodded. She couldn't speak. Her throat had gone dry, and her hands were starting to shake. What had she just done? The catering manager appeared out of nowhere, his face pale with panic. He grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her aside. Are you out of your mind? He hissed. You're here to work, not to perform. If you embarrass yourself out there, you're done. I'll make sure you never work another event in this city again. Elena looked at him. She looked at his angry face, his clenched jaw, his eyes full of warnings and threats. A week ago, those words would have terrified her. A week ago, she would have apologized and gone back to carrying trays, but something had changed. She didn't know what exactly. She just knew that she was tired of being afraid, tired of being small, tired of letting other people decide what she was worth. I understand, she said calmly. But I'm going to play anyway. She handed him her tray of champagne glasses and walked away before he could say another word. The piano was waiting for her in the corner of the ballroom. Elena approached it slowly, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Up close, the Steinway was even more beautiful than she had realized. The keys were perfect, untouched, gleaming under the soft light. She sat down on the bench. The leather was cool against her legs. She placed her hands on the keys, just resting them there, feeling the familiar weight of the ivory beneath her fingers. For a moment, she was somewhere else. She was back in her grandmother's apartment, sitting at the old upright piano with the chipped keys. She could smell her grandmother's perfume, something soft and floral. She could hear her grandmother's voice. Gentle, but firm. Play from your heart, Elena. That's where the music lives. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In 30 minutes, she would either prove everyone wrong, or she would fail in front of 300 strangers. Either way, there was no turning back now. Elena sat at the piano bench, her hands resting on the keys, and tried to remember how to breathe. The ballroom was still buzzing with conversation. People were laughing, drinking, talking about things that didn't matter. Most of them hadn't noticed her yet. To them, she was just another staff member doing something in the corner. Nothing important, nothing worth paying attention to, but that would change soon. In less than 30 minutes, every eye in this room would be on her. And Elena had no idea if she was ready. She lifted her hands from the keys and looked at them. They were shaking. Not a lot, but enough to notice. These hands had once moved across piano keys like water flowing over rocks. Smooth, effortless, natural. But that was years ago. That was a different Elena. A younger Elena who still believed the world was full of possibilities. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers didn't remember where to go? What if she sat down in front of 300 wealthy strangers and produced nothing but clumsy, broken notes? The thought made her stomach turn. She closed her eyes and tried to push the fear away. It didn't work. The fear was too big, too loud. It filled her chest like a weight, making it hard to think. Then she heard her grandmother's voice. Not out loud, of course. Her grandmother had been gone for 4 years now. But somehow, in moments like this, Elena could still hear her. That soft, steady voice that had guided her through so many difficult times. Fear is just excitement wearing a mask, her grandmother used to say. Don't run from it, dance with it. Elena almost smiled. Her grandmother had been full of sayings like that, little pieces of wisdom wrapped in simple words. At the time, Elena sometimes rolled her eyes at them, but now, sitting alone at this piano in a room full of strangers, those words felt like a lifeline. She placed her hands back on the keys. She didn't press down, she just let them rest there, feeling the cool ivory. Remembering the Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of Chopin's most famous pieces, and also one of his most difficult. Elena had spent almost 2 years learning it, practicing it over and over until her fingers knew every note by heart. She had been planning to perform it at her conservatory audition, back when she still had a future in music, back when everything seemed possible. She never got to play it for anyone. Life got in the way. Her grandmother got sick. The scholarship disappeared, and the ballade stayed locked inside her, unfinished, unheard. Until now, Elena pressed down gently on the keys, playing a soft chord. The sound that came out was pure and clear, filling the space around her like a warm light. The Steinway was perfectly tuned, every note ringing true. It was, without question, the finest piano she had ever touched. She played a few more notes, just testing. Her fingers moved slowly at first, hesitant, like they were waking up from a long sleep. But with each note, something shifted. The stiffness started to fade. The muscle memory started to return. It was still there. After all these years, the music was still there. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. She couldn't cry. Not now. Not here. There would be time for that later. She glanced over her shoulder. The ballroom was still busy, but she noticed a few people looking her way now. Curious looks, skeptical looks. She saw the woman in sequins whispering something to another guest, probably making another joke at her expense. Let them laugh, Elena thought. Let them think whatever they want. In a few minutes, they'll see. She turned back to the piano and took a deep breath. She had maybe 20 minutes left before the performance was supposed to start. 20 minutes to warm up fingers that hadn't touched a piano in 4 years. 20 minutes to remember a piece that took her 2 years to learn. It wasn't enough time. She knew that. But it was all she had. Elena began to play. Softly at first. Just fragments of the ballade. The opening melody, with its gentle, questioning notes. The way it built slowly, like a story being told. She let her fingers find their way, trusting them to remember even when her mind wasn't sure. Some parts came back easily. Others were harder. There were moments when she stumbled, when her fingers went to the wrong key or her timing was off. Each mistake sent a jolt of panic through her body. But she kept going. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. As she played, memories washed over her. She remembered sitting at her grandmother's old piano, struggling with this exact piece. She remembered the frustration, the hours of practice, the moments when she wanted to give up. And she remembered her grandmother sitting beside her, patient and calm, never letting her quit. You're not playing the notes, her grandmother would say. You're playing the story. Feel the story, Elena. Let it move through you. Elena had never fully understood what that meant. She was young then, focused on technique, on getting every note exactly right. But now, sitting at this Steinway in a room full of strangers, she thought maybe she was starting to understand. The Ballade wasn't just a collection of notes. It was a journey. It was longing, and hope, and heartbreak, and triumph. all woven together into something beautiful. And to play it right, you couldn't just move your fingers in the right pattern. You had to feel it. You had to live it. Elena had lived it. Every struggle, every loss, every moment of giving up her dreams to take care of someone she loved. It was all there, inside her, waiting to come out. She played through the piece once, then twice. Each time, it got a little smoother, a little more confident. Her fingers were remembering. Her heart was remembering. By the time she finished her second run-through, the ballroom had grown quieter. Elena looked up and realized that people were watching her now. Not everyone, but quite a few. They had heard her practicing, and something had caught their attention. She saw Richard Harrington standing near the edge of the crowd. His arms crossed over his chest. His face was hard to read. Was he impressed? Worried? Regretting his decision? Elena couldn't tell. She saw his wife standing beside him, her expression softer. There was something in her eyes that looked almost like hope, and she saw the woman in sequins, the one who had mocked the staff earlier. The woman wasn't laughing now. She was watching Elena with a strange look on her face. Surprise. Maybe? Or confusion. Like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. Good, Elena thought. Keep watching. A man in a dark suit approached the small stage area near the piano. He tapped a microphone, and the sound echoed through the ballroom. The crowd began to quiet down, turning their attention to the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said, "if I could have your attention, please. As some of you may have heard, our scheduled performer this evening has unfortunately been delayed due to weather and will not be able to join us." A murmur went through the crowd. Disappointed sounds, annoyed sounds. "However," the man continued, "we are fortunate to have a very special surprise for you tonight. Please welcome to the stage Miss Elena Vasquez." That was it. Her name. Spoken out loud to 300 strangers. No turning back now. Elena stood up from the piano bench. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. She smoothed down her server's uniform, suddenly very aware of how out of place she looked. Everyone else in this room was wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry. She was wearing black pants and a white apron. But she walked to the center of the small stage anyway. She looked out at the crowd, at all those faces staring back at her. Some looked curious. Some looked skeptical. A few looked openly amused, like they were expecting a joke. Elena took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm going to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. I hope you enjoy it." She walked back to the piano and sat down. The room was completely silent now. She could feel every eye on her, every expectation, every doubt. She placed her fingers on the keys. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of all the years of practice, all the dreams she had let go. She thought of standing in that small apartment, promising herself that one day she would play this piece for the world. This wasn't a concert hall. It wasn't the life she had imagined. But it was her moment. Maybe her only moment. Elena closed her eyes, and she began to play. The first notes of the ballade floated into the air like a question. Soft, gentle, almost hesitant. That was how Chopin had written it. And that was how Elena played it. A simple melody, searching for something, reaching out into the darkness. Elena kept her eyes closed. She couldn't look at the crowd. Not yet. If she saw their faces, their doubt, their expensive clothes, and judging eyes, she might lose her nerve. So she shut them all out and let herself disappear into the music. The opening phrase repeated, a little stronger this time. Then the melody began to climb, building slowly, adding layers of emotion with each passing measure. Elena's fingers moved across the keys like they had never stopped, like the last 4 years had been nothing but a dream. She could feel her grandmother beside her. Not literally, of course, but in some way that she couldn't explain. She felt her presence. That gentle warmth, that quiet encouragement. Play from your heart, Elena. That's where the music lives. So Elena played from her heart. She poured everything into the keys. Every struggle, every sacrifice. Every night she had worked double shifts, until her feet ached and her eyes burned. Every time she had walked past a piano in a store window and felt that sharp pain in her chest. Every dream she had buried so deep she thought it would never see the light again. The ballade grew more intense. The melody twisted and turned, moving through moments of beauty and moments of anguish. Chopin had written this piece after leaving his homeland, knowing he might never return. It was music about loss, about longing, about holding on to hope even when everything seemed impossible. Elena understood that now. She understood it in a way she never could have when she was 12 years old, practicing in her grandmother's apartment, with her whole life ahead of her. Back then, she had played the notes. Now, she was living them. The middle section of the ballade arrived, and with it came the storm. The music exploded into cascading runs and thundering chords. Elena's hands flew across the keyboard, faster and faster, demanding everything she had. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her arms began to ache. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. The music had taken over, and she was just along for the ride. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she was aware of the crowd. She could feel them watching, feel the weight of their attention. But it was different now. The energy in the room had shifted. The polite silence of the beginning had transformed into something else. Something heavier, more intense. She opened her eyes for just a moment and caught a glimpse of the audience. What she saw nearly made her stumble. People were leaning forward in their seats. A woman in the front row had her hand pressed against her chest, her lips slightly parted. A man near the back had removed his glasses and was wiping his eyes. Even the servers, her co-workers who had been bustling around the edges of the room, had stopped moving. They stood frozen, trays in hand, staring at her. Elena closed her eyes again and kept playing. The storm passed, and the music softened. A new melody emerged, tender and heartbreaking. This was Elena's favorite part of the ballade. The moment of stillness after the chaos. The quiet breath before the final push. She thought of all the people who had doubted her tonight. The woman in sequins who had mocked the staff. The catering manager who had threatened to end her career. Even Richard Harrington, who had taken a chance on her but probably expected her to fail. She wasn't playing for them. She wasn't playing to prove them wrong or to show off or to make a point. She was playing for herself. For the girl who had given up everything to take care of her grandmother. For the woman who had spent 4 years carrying trays and being invisible. For everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, that they didn't belong, that their dreams were too big for their circumstances. The final section of the ballade began. This was the hardest part. Technically speaking, a series of rapid passages that required absolute precision. Elena had practiced this section hundreds of times, and even then, she had never gotten it perfect. Her fingers flew across the keys. The notes came faster and faster, building toward the climax. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Every muscle in her body was tense, focused, alive. For one terrifying moment, she thought she was going to make a mistake. Her left hand hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and she felt the panic rise in her throat. But then something strange happened. Her fingers corrected themselves, finding the right keys almost on their own. The muscle memory was there, buried deep, waiting for this exact moment. The music surged toward its conclusion. Elena played the final chords with everything she had left. Her hands came down hard on the keys, filling the ballroom with a sound that seemed to shake the walls. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Elena sat motionless at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. She was breathing hard. Her whole body was trembling. She didn't know if she had played well. She didn't know if she had made mistakes. In those 10 minutes, she had lost herself so completely in the music that she had no idea what the audience had heard. Then the silence broke. It started with one person clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom had erupted into applause. Not polite, restrained applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from somewhere deep inside. Elena looked up. People were standing. All of them. 300 wealthy strangers in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. On their feet, clapping for her, a server in a wrinkled uniform who had no business being on that stage. She saw the woman in sequins. The one who had joked about the help having hidden talents. The woman was standing like everyone else. But she wasn't clapping. She was crying. Tears were streaming down her face, and she made no effort to hide them. She saw Richard Harrington. He was clapping slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or wonder, or something else entirely. She saw his wife, who was smiling so wide it looked like her face might break. She was saying something to the woman next to her, gesturing toward the piano, clearly excited, and she saw her co-workers, the other servers. They were clapping too, some of them wiping their eyes, some of them just staring at her in disbelief. One of them, a young woman Elena had worked with a few times, was grinning from ear to ear and giving her a thumbs up. Elena didn't know what to do. She had never experienced anything like this. The applause kept going, wave after wave, filling the room with a sound that was almost overwhelming. Finally, she stood up. Her legs were shaky, and she had to grip the edge of the piano bench for support. She took a small bow, not knowing what else to do. The applause grew even louder. When she straightened up, she felt something wet on her cheeks. She reached up and touched her face. Tears. She was crying and hadn't even realized it. But they weren't sad tears. They were something else. Relief, maybe, or joy, or the feeling of finally, after all these years, being seen. Elena stood there in her server's uniform, tears running down her face, surrounded by the sound of 300 people applauding. And for the first time in 4 years, she felt like herself again, not the invisible girl who carried trays, not the woman who had given up her dreams, but Elena, the real Elena, the one who had been hiding inside her all along, waiting for this moment, waiting to be heard. The applause eventually faded, but the night was far from over. Elena stepped away from the piano, still dazed, still trying to understand what had just happened. Her legs felt weak, and her hands were still trembling. She wanted to find a quiet corner somewhere and just breathe. But before she could take more than a few steps, people started approaching her. A man in a gray suit was first. He pressed a business card into her hand and said something about a music foundation he worked with. Then a woman in a red dress appeared, asking where Elena had studied, who her teachers were, whether she had any recordings. Then another person, and another, and another. Within minutes, Elena was surrounded by a small crowd of strangers, all of them talking at once. All of them wanting something from her. It was overwhelming. Elena smiled and nodded and tried to answer their questions. But her mind was spinning. Just an hour ago, these same people had looked right through her. She had been invisible to them, just another server carrying a tray. Now they were treating her like she was someone important. Someone worth knowing. She didn't know how to feel about that. Eventually, the crowd around her thinned out. People drifted back to their conversations, their drinks, their expensive lives. Elena found herself standing alone near the edge of the ballroom, clutching a handful of business cards she didn't remember accepting. That was when Richard Harrington walked over. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who was used to taking his time. When he reached her, he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her with those sharp eyes, studying her face like he was trying to figure something out. "That was remarkable," he said finally. His voice was quieter than before, less formal. "I've been hosting this gala for 15 years. I've seen a lot of talented musicians on that stage, but I don't think any of them ever made the room go that silent." Elena didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed too small, but it was all she could manage. Richard nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card of his own, but he didn't hand it to her right away. Instead, he held it between his fingers, turning it over slowly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Elena nodded. "Why are you carrying trays?" The question hit her harder than she expected. It was so simple, but it contained everything. All the years of struggle, all the choices she had made, all the dreams she had set aside. How could she possibly explain any of that to a man like Richard Harrington? But she tried. She told him about her grandmother, about the piano lessons and the scholarship and the letter that had seemed like a golden ticket to a different life. She told him about the illness, the medical bills, the impossible choice between her future and the person she loved most in the world. She told him about selling the piano after her grandmother died, about the years of working double shifts just to stay afloat, about slowly forgetting who she used to be. Richard listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was a piano teacher," he said finally. "Did you know that?" Elena shook her head. She didn't know anything about him, really. Just that he was rich and powerful, and lived in a house that looked like a castle. "She taught lessons in our living room when I was a kid," Richard continued. "We didn't have much money back then. My father worked 2 jobs, and my mother gave piano lessons to help make ends meet. She charged almost nothing. Sometimes she didn't charge at all, if the family couldn't afford it." He paused, looking out at the crowded ballroom. "She always said that music was a gift that should be shared. That talent shouldn't be wasted just because someone was born into the wrong circumstances." He turned back to Elena. "That's why I started this charity, to help kids who have the gift but not the opportunity. Kids like you were. Once." Elena felt her throat tighten. She had assumed Richard Harrington was just another wealthy man who threw parties to make himself feel good. She had never imagined he might actually understand what it was like to struggle. "I want to offer you a job," Richard said. Elena blinked. "A job?" "Not carrying trays." A small smile crossed his face. "The charity needs someone to do community outreach, someone who can visit schools, identify talented kids who can't afford lessons, help connect them with resources, someone who understands what they're going through because they've lived it themselves." He held out the business card. "And I want you to perform," he added, "at our events. For the kids in the program. Show them what's possible. Show them that where you start doesn't have to be where you end up." Elena stared at the card in his hand. This didn't feel real. None of it felt real. An hour ago, she had been refilling champagne glasses. Now, a wealthy stranger was offering to change her entire life. "Why me?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know if I'm qualified, or reliable, or—" "I know what I saw tonight," Richard interrupted. "I saw someone with extraordinary talent who never gave up on it, even when life gave her every reason to. I saw someone brave enough to stand up in a room full of people who doubted her and prove them all wrong." He pushed the card toward her. "That's exactly the kind of person I want working with these kids." Elena took the card. Her hands were shaking again, but for a different reason this time. "Think about it," Richard said. "Call my office on Monday. We'll talk." He gave her a small nod and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of guests. Elena stood there for a long time, staring at the card in her hand. Richard Harrington, Chief Executive, Harrington Foundation for Music Education. A phone number. An email address. A future she had never imagined. She thought about her grandmother, about all those Sunday afternoons spent at the old upright piano, learning scales and arpeggios, dreaming about concert halls and standing ovations. Her grandmother had always believed Elena was meant for something more. She had said it over and over again, right up until the end. "You're going to do something special, Elena. I know it. I've always known it." Elena had stopped believing that a long time ago. She had convinced herself that those dreams were childish, unrealistic, meant for other people. People with money and connections, and luck. But maybe her grandmother had been right all along. 6 months later, Elena stood in a small community center on the other side of the city. The building was old, and the paint was peeling, and the piano in the corner was slightly out of tune. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the room full of children sitting in front of her, their eyes wide with curiosity. They were kids from the neighborhood. Kids whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Kids who had probably never seen a piano up close before. Kids who reminded Elena so much of herself at that age that it almost hurt to look at them. She sat down at the old piano and smiled. "This piece is called the Ballade No. 1, she told them. "It was written by a man named Chopin almost 200 years ago. It's one of the hardest pieces in the world to play. And I'm going to teach you that hard doesn't mean impossible." She placed her fingers on the keys. "A very wise woman once told me that music is the one thing nobody can ever take from you," she said. She was right. No matter what happens in your life, no matter how hard things get, the music stays with you. It lives inside you, and when you're ready, it comes back. Elena looked at the children, at their eager faces, at the hope in their eyes. "Now," she said, "let me show you what I mean." And she began to play.